What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Looks like some presidents started to imitate each other. Trump's final offer to end the war in Ukraine, which is not final by any means, obviously, but you get the idea why it is called this way. Well, it landed on our news feeds like a poorly wrapped gift. 4 neat sections: ceasefire, security guarantees, territory, and economics. A perfect promise for a quick fix to a 3-year nightmare. A ceasefire with a vague European backup, the US blessing of Crimea's annexation, and a gracious return of Kharkiv and Zaporozhye regions to Ukraine under US oversight. Free passage on the Dnipro, mythical reconstruction money, and a magic eraser to wipe away sanctions which were implemented against Russia all the way since 2014. Sounds extremely in favor of Putin, don't you think, guys? But when you peer behind the promising language, you find 4 very different players scrambling for cover. Europe, shocked by its own empty arsenals. The United States itching to wash its hands. Russia, ready to pounce, just waiting for an excuse. And Ukraine bracing for a betrayal. What makes it dangerous is that in the unlikely case this deal goes through, is that Putin once again gets dry out of the water. His war crimes are never punished. He gets to keep most of his conquests. And most importantly, it gives him renewed confidence to do it all over again in the future. But next time, the target might not be Ukraine. In fact, 3 completely new countries for a potential invasion are being slowly introduced through the Russian propaganda to the people. So today, let's see what's really on the table and what this peace plan means for the future of Europe's bloodiest border. We'll then also briefly finish with the minerals deals, which was recently signed between the US and Ukraine, and see what it means for both of these countries, and whether it is a good or a bad idea. Before we proceed with the episode, I like to mention that some things might sound like I'm under the influence of the Z propaganda, but that's not the case. The goal of this channel since the very beginning was to present the news from as neutral standpoint as possible. It will be inappropriate of me to put on rose glasses and report on things like everything in sunshine and rainbows. This is not real journalism. Uncomfortable truth from time to time needs to be reported as well. Because this is the way some even more dire problems in the future can be resolved before they even happen. Never underestimate your enemy, never overestimate your chances. Well, with that out of the way, now guys, let's begin. Europe, usually shielding itself with a NATO-grade might, now looks like a theater troupe holding just rubber swords. When war started in 2022, the European Union discovered that its military storages, impressive on paper with hundreds of tanks, howitzers and anti-aircraft guns, turned out to be mostly static displays. I mean, imagine rolling a dozen rust-stained tanks and armored vehicles into a stage and declaring, "Bravo, look at us! Hundreds of combat machines ready to repel any aggression. Bring it on, we are ready." But in the meantime, it looks like that no one bothered to check if those 100-ton beasts could even start their engines, let alone survive an actual firefight. The magazines were thus clogged. Still usable ammo stocks were measured in days, not months. And the factories that once churned out shells had vanished like mirages. And no wonder. The goal of post-war alliance was to demilitarize as much as possible, which is a good thing. But in tough times, these factories for sure will be extremely useful. Then there is the legendary interoperability of NATO weapons, a holy grail that meant any German shell would fit seamlessly into a British tank, and a French gun would talk to the Dutch comms system without any interruptions. Fancy on a spec sheet, well, useless on the battlefield. Over decades of budget cuts and national pride, each country drifted into its own specs. German Rheinmetall, for example, cared only if shells fit Leopards. France did not bother about Leclercs, and the UK looked the other way on Challengers. No penalty for non-compliance meant no real standard ever happened. So, when the potential aggression does happen, Europe's proclaimed collective defense is, unfortunately, little more than a shared fantasy. Now imagine these same nations asked to guarantee a truce they cannot enforce. The offer hands them a starring role as a security providers, but no script or stage directions are ever communicated. Who supplies the tanks when the first ceasefire breach occurs? Who pays to rebuild the factories that no longer exist? If Putin rewinds the clock, these European guarantors will have no bullets, no boots, and no binding promises to keep him in check. A ceasefire backed by empty shells and empty words is just a lullaby for the unprepared. Well, NATO's Article 5, some might think, right? Well, that's apparently not exactly what it seems, and let's talk about this right now. Across the Atlantic sits the world's lone superpower, half-interested and wholly transactional, at least under current administration. Trump's most recent statement goes as following. America recognizes Crimea and the occupied lands, helps broker a vague ceasefire, then vanishes like a reluctant party guest. No boots on the ground, no nuclear umbrella raised. Article 5? Well, a clause written in the 1940s as a hedge, not a binding treaty. Many people incorrectly interpret what it means. Traditionally, people think that if one NATO member is attacked, the rest of the alliance is forced to enter the war to defend its member. But if you look on the NATO's website itself, that is not unfortunately the case. In fact, NATO's Article 5 obliges allies to take actions they deem necessary, which can mean literally anything from dispatching 2 HIMARS launchers to even, sending a sympathy card. There is no war declaration requirement, no mandate for troops, nothing that compels the US to fight Russia over, Riga or Vilnius. If Trump tweets "good luck to the Baltics," well, he technically honors Article 5 of NATO. This ephemeral pledge perfectly suits an administration itching to pivot back to MAGA-style isolationism. Build walls at home, slash overseas spending, and plug the immigration leaks. The Ukraine war is seen as a leftover headache from the Biden's era, one you just pop like a pimple and move on. If it does not budge, well, leave it until it's more ripe and then maybe take care of it. Well, Trump, J.D. Vance and the isolationist crew view European conflicts as a 19th century baggage. Why solve somebody else's massacre when you can rally at Wall Street dinner, announce shiny trade deals, or tweet about renewable energy conspiracies? As far as the White House is concerned, peace is simply stop shooting. Simple as that. That's it. It is peace according to them. Who holds what territory afterward is somebody else's problem. Sanctions get lifted, businesses resume, and the United States slips quietly out the back door, leaving Europe in danger for any future invasion. It is not random that I mentioned Riga and Vilnius earlier in this chapter, the capitals of Baltic, Latvia and Lithuania respectively, because recently the Russian propaganda started slowly building the narrative that a lot of Russian people live there, people who miss home. Sounds familiar, right? Let's not forget the 2 countries with boots in the mud. Russia, led by a man who grins at carnage and treats war as a business model, sees any ceasefire as a strategic pause. He will restock ammo and military equipment, train fresh recruits, and wait for the sanctions to ease to import Western tech straight into his war machine. Putin enjoys the spectacle of Russia's might, but not so much its costs. A temporary halt in hostilities means he keeps the army intact, the occupation forces stationed, and the pipelines humming. And then, when the truce ends, he can roll the tanks forward again, while Europe scrambles for reloads. Ukraine's view is a little bit different, but quite the same in the nature. A ceasefire does buy time for Russia, yet Ukraine desperately also needs a pause to rebuild shattered towns and retrain its million-strong volunteer army. But Kyiv also knows that any frozen frontline leaves its fate tied to Putin's whims and desires. While Russian forces lick their wounds behind the lines, Ukraine's fighters do not want a lasting peace that cements de facto annexations. Their hope rests on future political upheaval in Moscow, one that ends with Putin out of power and a real reset on border and reparations. Meanwhile, Ukrainian cities tremble at the thought of ceding any progress they have so hard bled for. And lurking beyond both capital cities are the Baltic states. Tiny stretches to strategic depth. With just 40 miles of land connecting Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to their NATO lifeline in Poland, a coordinated strike from either Kaliningrad or Belarus could sever their support route before anyone notices.
While Ukraine remains NATO's main focus, the Baltic region is now becoming a second hotspot. Finland and Sweden's entry into NATO has strengthened the alliance, but it has also fueled Russian countermeasures.
The Baltic trio is like a lifeboat attached by a fraying rope to a burning ship. Poland cannot single-handedly tow them to safety, and Ukraine obviously cannot spare forces to defend a neighbor in the north. Russian forces poised on the border is a prelude to a fresh conquest, one that Europe's not convincing for Putin guarantees and America's interpretation of Article 5 can no longer prevent. And it is true. Putin is looking in the direction of the Baltic states. The propaganda machine started already its slow work. The main narrative right now is that there are so many post-Soviet people living in these three countries who started to, feel homesick, and they cannot wait to be reunited with its big brother. Sounds awfully familiar, right? In case there is a ceasefire, the situation between Russia and Ukraine might end up with the Korean scenario that we talked about in our previous video. Please, by the way, go ahead and watch it if you missed it, so you have a full picture. But after Putin regains his strength, the chances of attacking Ukraine, at least in the near future, are apparently not extremely high. The Ukrainian armed forces will still have all the fresh real-life combat experience. The soldiers will be ready to be called for duty within days, and veterans will be sharing their experience with new recruits. Attacking Ukraine again after months of truce will not be the same as attacking Ukraine back in 2022 and taking Kyiv in 3 days, even though Putin failed there as well. While targeting Baltic states, that is a completely different story. Now let's quickly finish with the recently signed minerals deal between the US and Ukraine. We think it is very important to talk about it at least once, because many people have a very wrong understanding about what it is all about. So, when bullets and battle fatigue hit their limit, you sell what is under your feet. So that's why I enter the US-Ukraine resources deal, fresh off the press while the war still grinds on. Washington snagged a seat at Ukraine's mineral buffet. Uranium, rare earths, critical metals, and even oil and some of gas fields.
Well, we want something for our efforts beyond what you would think would be acceptable. And we said rare earth, they're very good rare earth. As you know, we're looking for rare earth all the time. Rare earth is called rare for a reason.
Trump, in his trademark bravado, flaunted that America will recoup much more in theory than all these billions wasted by Biden. It reads like a medieval tribute: pay us in gold, and we will keep propping up your defense budget. In return, Ukraine is allowed not to repay back those loans for at least a decade. The agreement's tightening language sounds like a veto. Anyone who funded Russia's war machine is barred from Ukraine's reconstruction bonanza. That line became Kyiv's victory tune, reassuring Brussels and grumbling investors that no shady oligarchs will pocket the spoils. Ukraine even extracted a guarantee that nothing in this pact will derail its European Union accession drive. If Brussels imposes new raw materials rules, the US swears to reopen the talks. Of course, none of this is pure charity. For the first 10 years, all profits funnel back into Ukraine's battered economy, such as roads, hospitals, fresh recruitment bonuses, you name it. After that, the bank is open for distribution. And meanwhile, whispers swirl around that future aid packages might be packaged as bonus installments behind this resources fund. Well, if you're hungry for patriots, just tap into this minerals money, right? The misconception was that this deal practically gives all Ukrainian rare earth minerals to the US, but as you can see, it is not exactly that. Both sides enjoy the benefits, and it is a much better solution than asking Ukraine to repay all the billions poured into the country, because this will completely bankrupt Ukraine. And even though the US is the biggest Ukraine's partner, all the assistance was not a charity. Sure, some things might be forgiven here and there, but at some point Ukraine will have to repay the debt in one way or another. And this minerals deal is not the worst way, to be honest, to do it. Well, that helped, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe